Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International here. The grand finals is about to begin. If you'd ever like to support the prize pools for the Mythic Dungeon International or for the AWC, you can always check out some of the Transmorpher Beacon or the in-game fireworks toys that are now on sale, linked in the description below or on the Battle.net shop. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk is Sours, Nagura, and Sloot here. And we're having a Method versus Method grand finals here to start us off. Method NA was dropped down to the lower bracket early on in the series, in this tournament this weekend, and has had to fight their way out, taking down many teams along the way here. They even had their redemption against Abracadabra here, who knocked them down to begin with, bringing them back up to the grand finals to face off against the #1 seed Method EU, which has looked incredibly powerful going into this. Now, Salute, starting it off, our very first map is going to be Waycrest, a dungeon that Method EU has just dominated thus far.
Yeah, I mean, their only mistake on the Waycrest Manor that they did was being too good at it and moving too quickly and then not having access, because they do one of the strats, of course, where they leave some trash upstairs, kill Gorak Tool, the 5th boss, pour it all the way upstairs, and then they were planning on having that Bloodlust available to them going upstairs, and they didn't. So they actually wiped to a pack that they're not used to not having their Bloodlust on. So, I mean, they haven't even come close to dropping a game yet. Almost flawless gameplay from them.
It is very powerful for them. And the other thing to think about is they have been able to kind of sit back and watch Method NA work. Once they won that third round of the day in the upper finals, they've been able to sit back and watch Method NA try to fight their way out of this. This is going to be the 4th series Method NA has to play. And as a player yourself, Nagura, that's got to be exhausting for them.
Most definitely. Not only is it exhausting, but it also gave Method EU just more time to practice those exact dungeons that they need for this final here, while Method NA had to focus on their other series to even get here, right? So their mindset might be in a different kind of set right now because of just having those two series just being so straining and exhausting on them, while Method EU was just sitting back, watching them, and had time to practice those 3 dungeons as well.
And while it is late at night for the European crowd here, they've had plenty of time to be able to rest here. Method EU has been a team that has been firing on all cylinders, but let's not forget that Method NA has been the #2 seed for a reason. But those Twitch results, though, Method EU looking so powerful according to Twitch here. But Waycrest Manor, map 1. Let's see who's going to be able to take this first game in the series of the grand finals.
So if I want to take it out of Method NA here, we're going to see the stealth going straight for that second boss, and we see a more aggressive approach. Well, arguably aggressive, but it's certainly a different approach coming out of Method EU as they deal with the first essences. We know that Method EU actually liked to get that first reaping proc at 20% in the Triad Wing and then pull all of that reaping on top of the first boss. Method NA has already aggroed the first boss, though, Nagura.
Yeah, so they also use their Bloodlust here, Method NA sides, to just kill this Triad boss, while Method EU saved their Bloodlust maybe for this reaping pull, as you said, to pull it on top of the Triad. We see the Devil Sap coming out here, just stealthing past this. And one thing to mention, maybe Method EU, they did have a really good strategy coming in the very first time we saw them in Waycrest Manor, but this whole backtracking at the very end and then just being too fast, maybe they changed up their strategy and did something different now just to not have the same problem again.
Yeah, and I like what they did upstairs there. They actually double sapped on the far side of the top left hallway, because we do know that one of the Runeweaver lieutenants actually spawns in the right portion of the hallway. So they double sapped and stealthed on through to make sure that they don't have to deal with that spawn and those mobs. Celia dipping a bit low here, down to 7% right now with some of the pulsing damage, but manages to stabilize as they kite down the hall. A lot of damage coming in here. Let's not forget, we are in Necrotic in Waycrest Manor. There's going to be a lot of strain on the tank as they desperately try to clean off some of their stacks in these tight spaces of the manor.
Yeah, so they did use their Bloodlust for this trash pull here on Method EU side. We see now just hiding those mobs around because they're just so dangerous on the mobs with these Shadow Cleaves. And of course, you also need to be aware that those witches, depending on which one they spawn, they are not actually susceptible. You can't stun them, you can't knock them back. So no matter what you do, the witch can refresh the necrotic on the tank. So you need to be very careful when you do a pull like that, that your tank has some way of getting rid of the necrotic here.
Method NA just down sub 10% on the final Sister Briar as they down the first boss. Only 3% on the trash, so they're going to be looking to work towards their first reaping momentarily here. So a bit of a flip-flop. We got Method EU on the left side working on trash, trying to proc their first reaping into the first boss, whereas Method NA on the right has actually killed the first boss, will work towards their first reaping, which likely they will pull with actually with some trash.
Yeah, so of course we don't want to see them pulling that reaping by itself to not lose. It's just so inefficient to kill reaping by itself or do any single big HP mob by itself, as we've talked about a lot. So we definitely want to see both of those teams pulling the reaping on top of something else, even though it is very dangerous because of those affixes. Just having the necrotic, of course the reapings do not apply necrotic, but the trash does, of course, and just having the bursting on top of that too is just so dangerous when you have that many amount of reaping mobs plus trash or plus a boss.
Nerf backing it on up like a U-Haul truck here as he tries to get rid of his 25 stacks of necrotic. Does so successfully, but gets chunked as soon as he gets back in, propping right up to 6-7 stacks of there it is, of necrotic as he kites in the opposite direction of the hallway. Now, I believe it was Method NA that ended up re-pulling the opening trash of the manor and then just kind of killing the reaping pack there by itself. That, was it not them?
I believe so.
Yeah,
it was Method NA,
that
yeah.
we commented on. So hopefully they've kind of further developed that strategy to make more efficient cleave use out of their reaping. We'll have to see here in a second as they're at the 11% mark. Yoda getting chunked here quite a bit. There is a lot of cleave damage that goes on here with the two guards that are in there. They have that frontal shadow cleave, so have to have some careful positioning here. Method EU has indeed procced their reaping pack as predicted. We've seen them do the first time and has already kind of aggroed the first boss.
Yeah, so this first boss is probably the most difficult boss in this whole dungeon. Now it is fortified, so of course it is a little bit less scary, but this triad here only has one boss active at a time. Whoever boss holds the iris will be active. All the other bosses do have 99% reduced damage, so you need to make sure that you do hit the boss whoever has the iris at this time. Now they all have an aura if they're active. The first boss, Selena, does have a 50% healing reduced aura. Now Briar has pretty much an aura that needs you to move all the time. If you stand still, then there will be a debuff that stacks up the death taking damage, as we can see right now happening. And the last boss does have a debuff as well that pretty much is just like a reflective kind of shield that doesn't do too much damage, so you can pretty much ignore that last aura.
Yeah, so Sister Briar dropping here for Method EU. And, you know, I'm not really liking this. Method NA is doing the same thing here. They're proccing their reaping with these essences. We're having Nerf, of course, leap around the area, making sure he avoids that. So they're going to proc their first reaping just by themselves in this first area. These could and easily can be drawn into, you know, some trash in the courtyard, which is where they're going to make their next move. So a bit of inefficiency here, in my opinion, at least. Method EU just now dealing with the triad, finishing it off and pulling the rest of the trash in that room. So pretty equivalent trash percentage on both sides of the field here.
Yeah, one thing to note as well is that Method EU didn't actually pull those Acolyte packs from the side on top of the boss, which we've seen almost all of the other teams do so far. Now, of course, Method EU had the reaping on top of it, so maybe they had to use so much resources to kill the reaping on top of the boss that they just did not have enough defensives left and so on to kill, to pull the other mobs on the side as well, because of course they also have a lot of small toads on them, which are not very difficult to deal with, but they all apply necrotic to the tank on top of just having the triads there, so that might be the dangerous part about it.
Method NA moves into the corner of the courtyard right now, making sure to drop that Ring of Peace on top of Nerf so he can reset his necrotic stacks. Make sure that, you know, it's really funny to see they did the exact same move last time, and I was just about to say, good thing those mobs died right before the Ring of Peace ended, but now that they've done it twice in a row, is quite perfectly calculated on their part to make sure that those very dangerous necrotic stacks are gone. So Gingy pulling really ahead here on his rogue as he moves all the way into Rawl's room right now, kind of pops up in the middle, saps a few targets and comes right back out as the rest of the team works to finish off these Thorn Shapers and of course the Thorn Guards as well. We do have a Soul Fetish go off on the X marked Thorn Shaper right there, so once they die it will actually buff a surrounding mob with a 5 stack of haste and damage, but as long as they're the last one to die, it doesn't really matter.
So one trick you can actually do in this dungeon is okay, so we always have the same door open on this tournament room, it's always top left, but on live service it can be different doors that are open, just random. Now one thing you can do to open different kinds of doors is to actually engage with this boss fight and then vanish or use something like that, as we've seen Gingy just do, and it will actually open up some of the doors that would be closed otherwise, which enables some of the strategies that they're doing in this dungeon.
Yeah, very clever play from them there to be able to kind of just open up the entire play field for themselves. Pretty big pull, trash pull, excuse me, here from Method EU on the left side, looking to likely prop their 40% round of Reaping, which, if I'm not mistaken, they pulled on top of Matron Brindle in the back there. I mean, this was yesterday, and I can't remember what I had for breakfast, so we'll have to see exactly how that works out for them. Method and A also just working to finish off the rest of the trash. Both teams kind of edging on that 40% Reaping wave in just a moment, but Lighty getting quite low here as well, 10%, and he's just desperately getting healed up by JB with all of those bursting stacks on the group.
Yeah, it's just so important to have a proper bursting management here. Especially in Waycrest Manor, there's so many small mobs that apply bursting to your group, and if you kill something at the very last second while the bursting is about to disappear, it will refresh the duration of your bursting and give you an additional stack. So it's very important to deal with that properly. And we do see Method EU proc the Reaping here. They decide to pull it on top of this mini boss here.
So indeed, they do pull it on top of Matron Brindle. Now, unfortunately, Now did not have the time before she started her Thorned Assault to get Brindle into one of the fires that spawned near her, just to get that extra bonus damage. So a bit of time lost there. Nothing too significant, however, as he works backwards there just to get her into that last fire for the remaining about 25% of her HP. Method and A not falling too far behind here, working on Brindle as well. Now, they have not yet procced their Reaping, and likely with her death, they will do so. So it looks like they'll likely be pulling, I think we just saw them do it earlier, and you were commenting, hopefully the boss doesn't have an issue with a despawn for them, but they were pulling the Reaping on top of this Soulbound Goliath and cleaving it there, whereas Method EU decided to do it with the Matron.
Yes, I do believe Method EU is a little bit ahead at this point because they both engaged the boss pretty much at the same time. Now, Method NA has 41% trash percentage, while Method EU actually has 47%. So they are ahead in trash. They both do not have a Bloodlust ready for this boss fight, but this boss fight shouldn't be a big problem for them on a fortified setting. Now, Goliath does have an aura that stacks up the longer he's not being dragged into fire. That increases the damage done on a tank, of course, and also on the group once you do drag him into the fire.
Yeah, so we, if I'm not, well, I was actually about to say, if I'm not mistaken, Method EU barely reset the boss in the previous time we saw them on Waycrest Manor, but now deciding to play safe here as they dip him in the first round of fire. You can see that they're standing a bit further away from the boss, and Azalea is also running to the side of the platform as he does have aggro on those red ghosts that spawn. They spawn for about 15 seconds, and he rips healing aggro off them. You can't taunt them or anything, so he has to run them away for the group while everybody else is stacked on top of the boss to make sure that they bait the thorns and can be cleaved down effectively.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. Those red mobs, they usually do have aggro on the healer because of healing aggro, but if for whatever reason your healer was not healing anything or was getting targeted by the thorns, then it might be the tank who got healing aggro passively by his defensives, and then if a tank is not prepared for those red ghosts hitting him, then he might just die. So you need to be careful here that the healer actually gets the aggro and drags him away.
Method NA pulling just a bit ahead in terms of single target damage, maintaining about a 5 to 6% cushion over Method EU with the Soulbound Goliath, but conversely there is a 6% trash advantage for Method EU, and we know that that's in the range of the amount of trash that teams kind of ignore until Gorak Tool is done. So we'll have to see which of the two strategies they opt to use with cleaning up trash at the end of the dungeon. Method NA now moves into probably what is the most dangerous part of this dungeon in terms of mob density versus a necrotic plus bursting. So a lot of healing output is going to be needed here, and a lot of tank damage is going to be incoming.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of deaths come in here from previous teams in these dungeons because of those big pulls here. We see the Vortex coming down, we see the AoE stun coming down just to control these mobs here that do just randomly cast this spit on random people that do a lot of damage. And we see Gingy, unfortunately, having so much aggro, getting almost 20, I think around 20 necrotic stacks on him, which of course reduces the healing, but he's a rogue, right? So he does have a lot of defensives to deal with that, and he probably did cloak away those bursting stacks to not be in trouble while having the necrotic debuff on him.
Yeah, so no problem for them as they kind of safely kite around, grabbing this last 3 pack in the corner, which looks like they will spawn their 60% Reaping Wave for Method EU safely here in the courtyard, where there is some nice amount of space for now the tank to be able to kite around as needed should the stacks get out of hand, and Zalia miss any dispels, of course, from the Reaping mobs. Method NA still at 46% on the trash, getting some of the saps in Rawl's room as we see a pretty sizable pull coming in from Method NA. So cheeky play there where they actually despawned Rawl temporarily while the rogue ran in, allowing the ability for Nerf to run in, pull the entirety of the trash in the room, because we know the danger of Rawl being stationary with Necrotic. So they're clearing out all of the boss's room whilst despawning the boss within that small time window and just doing as much damage as they can outside with that Bloodlust popped.
Yeah, we see Method EU also popping their Bloodlust. They did trigger their Reaping Wave outside with this huge pull that they did, and they walked back, pulling Rel with this Reaping Wave. Now, this is dangerous at the start. Of course, the Reaping mobs, not only are there a couple of casters, as we can see, just keep casting those Grave Bolts, and it's very hard for them to also stack them up because, of course, there's no Blood Decay or anything like that for a Mass Grip. The only thing they do really have to displace them is that Typhoon and a Ring of Peace, but we can just see them in the back just constantly casting on the group, and we also have bursting stacks from some previous mobs that they pulled as well on the whole team. We start to see Sally drop really low here.
So no problem for them in the end. Now did get up to about 31 stacks of Necrotic. A lot of healing reduction, 62% healing reduction from that. Azalea, in a more one of the most defensive roles that I've seen him in so far, actually was just pumping as much healing as he could into now. Unfortunately, he couldn't reset the Necrotic stacks as early as he'd wanted, but still, they managed to do the pull here. Massive pull on top of Rawl with Bloodlust for them. Method and A following suit, though, grabbing that Reaping Wave and bringing it right into Rawl's room. We're going to have to keep a close eye here on Nerf's Necrotic stacks and on his Reaping stacks. He's at 10 and 15 apiece. Finally gets the Dispel from JB as he starts to still accrue more Necrotic stacks. And as long as those two Gorgers are alive, he will keep getting the stacks and not having the natural resets that Rawl allows during this Tenderize because he can't leave proximity of the boss.
Okay, so we saw the Gorgers actually jump to targets and they will leave behind a bleed debuff that actually does quite a bit of damage. And we just saw them jump, applying 2 of those stacks to Nerf on top of this already existing Necrotic. So they have to be very careful here to not have Nerf die on top of all of this other damage that happens. And now we see Method E almost downing Rel here. So they are pretty far ahead when it comes to boss HP. They are 40% ahead, while also having 2% more trash.
Yeah, so Method E certainly in a pretty prime position, having or proving to have at least a better pull pattern so far over their counterpart Method NA. Now, Warriors especially, you know, we keep saying all this necrotic damage, but really Rawl does not do a lot of damage, and the quality of the trash that they pulled on top of him does not do a lot of tank damage. Warriors are well known to be just rocks in terms of tanking with mitigation and smoothing, so getting up to that amount of stacks isn't too dangerous when their health's not even really moving in the first place. But, you know, I mean, there's a limit, of course. If they get unhealables, take a chunk, that's going to be problematic for them. But both tanks managed to get to the 30s stacks of necrotic on Rawl and just live quite easily through it. Rawl now down to 10% for Method NA, while Method EU is cleaning up the kitchen here.
Yeah, a lot of times what we see out of Method EU is those tricks pulls, as we can see them drop really low on this pull here. But they do have double rogues available to them. They can put their tricks on the warrior and then they can just run off, pull a bunch of trash, and they will just aggro on now on the Proud Warrior and it will come back. So very efficient use of tricks here, as we're gonna see something very interesting. Actually, no, I think they changed up their strategy, actually, because the last time around, we've seen them do some bigger pulls here in the basement, but now they're choosing to trap past it.
Yeah, they pulled Alma last time. We kept commenting on it. Of course, the warrior can reflect the decaying touch. They certainly do not have enough trash percentage right now to be able to just complete the dungeon with the last horrors on top of Gorak Tool, so they might still be sticking to their guns of killing Gorak Tool and warping up with Bloodlust for the final pack. We'll have to see what they do here. Certainly didn't pull any extra trash from the basement down to the cellar here, but did decide to pull the entirety of the room prior to engaging the, I was going to say the Storm Song, that's the wrong dungeon, but the Waycrest couple here. Method NA still grinding through in Rawl's room as they pulled the rest of the hallway of the surrounding maggots up to 72% now, so they do have a bit more percent to kind of play with and skip down to if needed.
Yeah, so Method is still working on this spec now. Now it's dropping really low. These mobs are very dangerous in combination to one another. We saw the Ring of Peace coming in, the Typhoons, to be able to deal with all of the necrotic plus bursting stacks plus all the caster mobs, of course, that at some point you're just going to run out of interrupts, even if you have 3 melees.
Yeah, so they do down the trash, and of course this next boss here, once again, kudos to Prot, where it has that spell reflect that can be used on Lord Stormsong himself. We've seen this boss a few times already in the series, just to refresh everyone's memory. Lord Waycrest, the one on the right, not the fake Lord Waycrest on the left, which is actually Lady Waycrest, will get killed several times down to 20% HP, and at that point Lady Waycrest will siphon 30% of her health over to him. When she reaches 10% after 3 rounds of this, she will join the fight as well for the second phase.
Yeah, so we saw them actually proc the Reaping and pull it on top of the boss. So just in general, pretty efficient dealing with the Reaping here by Method AU. Now this boss in the first phase, what Lady Waycrest does while she's not actually in the fight, she just throws these bolts at random targets, as we can see the animation coming in here. Now on 45, it is manageable, it doesn't do that much damage, but you can get a little bit unlucky and just be shot by her multiple times in a row, while also having this debuff, as we see this on Gingy right now, which is a disease, and a circle around the player does ticking damage, and once it explodes, you need to make sure that you're not close to any other player, else it will jump over to them.
Method NA, it looks like they largely actually shadow melded their 80% reaping wave. A couple of them leaked downstairs. They did grab, no, actually a lot of them are running towards them, so I'm not sure if they tried to or not. I did see a shadow meld go off. Nonetheless, they pulled the captain and the Thunder Shaper from upstairs in the basement area down towards the rest of the group right in front of the Waycrest family. They're opting for a strategy where they will have enough percent on top of the horrors with Gorak Tool at the end. So it does look like they're a bit behind, but Method EU will have to make up the remaining trash percentage after Gorak Tool dies. They have absolutely no choice behind that.
Yeah, so there's two different stats coming in from those two teams. Now, Method NA will not have to backtrack. We talked about backtracking, right? It's not very efficient. Now, Method EU, we don't really ever see them do anything that is very inefficient, except in this dungeon where we see them do the backtracking, where we see them go back after the last boss and kill this last trash pack that they need. Maybe they just decided this is the best strategy for this dungeon because they get the proper reaping waves at the exact time as they want, and maybe they just decided that the walk back to talk to them and to spawn at the entrance again and kill this pack is just worth it, and it's just the best time we can do.
So they just deal with the mob straight on here as Now stays in as long as he can, making sure that they drop that Ursul's Vortex while Zalia baits that jump from the Gloom Horrors on the outside. Once Now's had enough at 30 stacks, he leapt out, and Mir's dropped his Ring of Peace as support, so Now can let go of those necrotic stacks. No problem for them. He gets down to 2% though, so we have a bit of a death there on Now with the mishealing from the bursting. Likely won't cost them too much though, because they do have the checkpoint from the fourth boss here. As he just reses immediately. Zalia manages to get a drink in, and they rush downstairs to Gorak Tool. They've already dealt with the horrors. 9% trash left on the board for them. Have to kill Gorak Tool first, and then they will head upstairs to that same pack of trash we saw them have some struggles with actually last time. So a bit of benefit here for Method NA as they run over and finally pull the Waycrest family. So it's actually going to be a bit closer than you think here.
Okay, so as you said, so Method NA doesn't actually need to backtrack, but they're one whole boss behind. I don't think this is going to make up for the backtracking. Now, Method EU only needs to kill this boss, which actually dies really quickly on 45, and then they have to, so the boss that Method NA is working on does take a lot longer than the last boss, Gorak Tool. So I do think Method NA is their game to win here. As long as they don't have a full wipe again like the last time, once they backtracked, did not have their Bloodlust ready, and actually wiped on this trash pool to get their last percentage, then it should be their game to win here.
But I'm actually having a bit of concern that they're going to have deja vu with that very same issue. There's
Maybe.
still 2 minutes left on Bloodlust, and they're absolutely destroying through Gorak Tool's health. I mean, they're cutting through it like warm butter right now, dealing well with the slavers, making sure they're interrupting the death lens so that none of the players get permanently stunned. See that nice gouge come up on that particular slaver, and burning the corpses before Gorak Tool reaches that 100 energy. So they're handling everything quite well, obviously. Lady Waycrest is finally down, so we're on the second phase for Method NA right now, after which they will pull presumably the first 5, maybe even actually 6 horrors while they CC the last one, and then start on Gorak Tool as well. 15% for Method EU as they look to down it and get upstairs as quickly as possible for the trash.
Yeah, so you see the slavers jump around here. Sally actually doing a really good job at putting that AoE out, because the slavers actually do a splash damage once they hit their target. So Sally running away, making sure not everyone else is getting hit by the splash damage. So very good job at them. Now the boss goes down. They're very, very fast at jumping up the sledge. Now they need to talk to this NPC that just spawned to get back.
And they have 1 minute left on Bloodlust, so once again, will not have the Bloodlust available, so we'll see if they can capitalize on the error they had here. They still need 9% trash, and there's a lot of damage that comes from the trash in this room. Now doing well, of course, to line of sight the mobs behind that pillar, as there are some ranged mobs in here that have quite an annoying time getting close to the tanks. Have to be careful for any of the traps that are currently on the ground. Method NA still grinding through those horrors as they work their way to Gorak Tool in a second. Method EU should have this in the bag unless they have any issue with deaths like they did the first time. Now making sure to play it safe here and not get too many necrotic stacks. Shield wall fading off of him in just a moment. 17 stacks gone, and they should be able to clutch this in just a second.
Yeah, so they still have Bloodlust Golem, so they were even faster than the last time they did Waycrest Manor. Just incredible strategy coming out of Method EU here. While both of those teams played super clean, only 1 and 0 deaths, but Method EU just having the better strategy.
Method EU putting on the clinic in Waycrest Manor here, sealing game 1 in the series against their NA counterpart here. It was an incredible performance, and even better, as we mentioned, than the first showing that we had from them here. Sours, we had a really strong performance out of them going into this. What were the big pressure points that we were looking at here where Method EU was just executing like crazy?
Yeah, the Method EU was just, they looked very tied throughout most of the dungeon, but they did a really good job resetting Raw early before they even engaged the second boss. But Method NA didn't even get to reset the boss, and I know you talked about it during the game, Nagura, how you can reset the boss to open the doors to pull some trash. So Method EU did that like well in advance of Method NA doing that, and they just kind of pulled ahead, like even like very, very far ahead at Raw, where they ended up, Method EU ended up killing the second boss just a little bit slower than Method NA, but they were like a full 40% ahead, I believe, of Method NA when they finally ended up down in that third boss.
Yeah, it really seemed like there was just one point where Method NA was equal with them, or just ended up being a little bit further ahead until what ended up happening on that one, Sours?
Something did happen, and we happened to catch it, so we can even take a look here at what happened. So Method NA clears up the trash. Yoda is going now to do the reset after the boss, after they end up doing with trash, but something's happened. He was stealthed just a second ago, but if you look closely at his frame, he's got that spit debuff on him from the maggots, where Shakib does not have the spit debuff. So the debuff broke him out of stealth when he goes to run into the hallway, and then he's going to start going into the hallway. He hasn't quite realized he's come out of stealth, and then he face pulls the Pallid Gorgers, and he's got to use his Vanish cooldown, and he needs that Vanish cooldown to reset the boss and open the doors. So then Shakib falls shortly behind and resets the boss so they can get through the doors, but because of that one mistake, they lost an incredible amount of time, and that put them very far behind Method EU.
And we noticed Gingy didn't have any time to waste there as he ran in there, taking the reset from Rahl, opening up all the doors, making it much easier for their tank to be able to execute something very similar there. But moving on into game 2, we're going to be moving on to the Underrot here. Again, another one of those time trial maps that we have seen quite a bit of. So what does Method NA need to be able to get back into this?
I mean, Method NA just had a really solid performance on this map recently, if I'm not mistaken, so they just need to do what they did before and do it well. I mean, you know, they've had it go both ways, and Method EU, I'm not sure when the last time they've done it was either. Certainly not today, if I'm not mistaken. No, they haven't.
That's correct. They haven't done it at all this tournament. Yeah. So what's kind of cool about this final round is that Method EU actually has full knowledge on Method NA. So every match in this final round, the Method EU has seen Method NA strategies. However, we haven't seen Method EU run their Underrot or a Tal Dazar yet this tournament. So they know how Method NA pulls these dungeons, and so if they know that, okay, our strategy is slower than theirs, we've seen how they do it. We know how we can adapt to go faster than them.
But on the contrary, I mean, they can be well warmed up at this point, Method NA, and you know, who knows how much Method EU has practiced these dungeons. Knowing that it would be in the final, though, I'm assuming they've gotten a couple of rounds of practice in by now, but it's going to be interesting to see what strats they have, because we just haven't seen it yet.
Repeating dungeons has been a very big strength for Method NA. Moving on to round 2 between Method EU and Method NA right after this. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International here. Method EU is up game 1 with their powerhouse pick in Waycrest Manor here. Moving on to round 2, we'll be going into the Underrot, a dungeon we haven't seen out of Method EU at all, but we've seen twice out of Method NA, Sours.
That's right. Method NA has done this twice so far in the tournament, and both times, well, they have won it. They have always had deaths in like similar spots everywhere in the dungeon, where JB's always dying in the Krogma room every single time when they do that massive pool with all the bats, with all the slimes. He somehow finds a way to just get taken out over there. And even though they've done well and they've won both of those games, they went 40 seconds slower actually than Method EU in time trials for this dungeon. So Method EU is really looking to just get a clean 2-0 out of this.
And we've seen how impressive Method EU can be, but let's not forget, Nagura, Method NA, whenever they go into the second or even third time that they've played through a dungeon, they always seem to be much improved here. I think that they're going to have what it takes to be able to make it through that Underrot, especially in light of them switching back to that Unholy Decay.
Okay, it's very interesting to see that Method EU is not actually switching to that Unholy Decay, because I do believe in the time trials they were playing a DK too. So seeing that they're not switching while Method NA is switching is interesting.
Yeah. I've been looking forward to be able to see where they are at. Method NA needs this game to survive and to stay in this grand finals here. It's a Method team kill coming up in the Underrot.
Well, I mean, this dungeon, I'm really curious to see where it comes out of Method NA here. As the gates open for both teams, now charges right into that first Maggot and grabs the Matron as well, grouping the entirety of the 6-pack together and, of course, ignoring those ticks on this side. Method NA in a similar pull, so exactly equivalent pulls coming out of both Method teams here.
Yeah, so we've seen Method NA twice in this dungeon. Now, we should keep our eyes on Method EU for now, because they might just have one strategy that we have never seen before, something completely different, because they had the fastest time in Underrot, or one of the fastest time, definitely faster, 40 seconds than Method NA, and Method NA have been crushing it in this dungeon. They've won both of those 2 games early in the tournament.
Right, you are, Nagor. Of course, we are back into the Sanguini and Volcanic affixes here. Volcanic wanting to be avoiding those fire plumes that we just saw one explode on Method EU at the bottom of the screen there. Sanguine, meaning they drop the pools of goop on the ground when they die, which heal friendly enemy mobs, and of course do damage to friendly players. Want to make sure you move out of those, and the tank is constantly kiting and backpedaling out of that. Method NA now having a bit of struggle here with Lighty dropping low, but has seemed to stabilize health as those hots carry him back up to safety. Method EU is also dealing with a similar mask pull. Both teams likely looking to proc their first Reaping and bring it on top of the first boss, Liaxa.
Yeah, some scary pulls coming in from both of those teams. Now this Tyrannical, so the trash is not buffed, but pulling those double matrons onto these big packs, especially this pack with the Blood Soul in the middle that usually gets ignored, like that gets skipped by on live servers, because it's just such a dangerous pack to deal with. So many interrupts, so many priests, so many casters and matrons coming in that you usually just skip this, but very good control from both of those teams to be able to handle these packs. And we see on Method NA stats, they did proc the Reaping and pull it on top of the boss with the Bloodlust.
Yeah, just a bit faster too. That 21% on the trash, 22 now for Method EU as they run over to Liaxa as well. Getting that first spell reflect on the Blood Bolt, seeing a big chunk go down for Liaxa from Method EU. Now is of course with his spell reflect. Method NA doing the same thing, just slightly ahead, but Nerf, as I spoke too soon, actually goes down. They get the battle res up. They have to interrupt that Blood Bolt, because as soon as the tank dies, the next Blood Bolt will hit the next highest aggro target. Extremely good recovery here. That is usually a disaster on live server for most teams when that happens. So they managed to recover. They are down the battle res now and plus 5 seconds on the clock, but managed to stabilize here. They've killed off the Blood Mirror and are going about Liaxa as they were before, back to 30%. Method EU still dealing with Liaxa at 50%.
Yeah, so one battle res out here. Thankfully, no one died while the tank was dead. Usually, when a tank dies on a boss fight, then the boss will immediately aggro some melee around him and kill him too. But because this boss pretty much only does damage with the Blood Bolts, they managed to interrupt them all and keep everyone else alive. Now, what I do believe happened with Nerf here was that he wanted to spell reflect one of the casts, but he actually got targeted by one of the Reaping Souls and reflected that spell instead. But he did get one-shot by something, so I assume it was the Blood Bolt.
Now also just eats one of the bolts to the face and dips down to about 5% HP. A lot of damage that come off of those Blood Bolts. Equivalent amounts of damage from the Blood Effigies as well, the mirrors that it casts from the boss. So want to make sure you interrupt all of those. Spell reflect coming up on that last one to help finish the boss off as Method EU finishes up. Method NA wasting absolutely no time on the right side of the screen here as they rush into the second boss's room, into Kragmaw's room.
Yeah, so we see this huge pull again from them, going to the left side, making sure they pull the Blood Swarmers carefully, and once all the Blood Swarmers from behind the boss and the left side are gone, they will do this crazy pull on the right side where they will gather up all the mobs, where we have seen JB dying twice now. Now they did manage to recover the last time, but this time around they do not have a battle rest for him.
Right, you are. And the bigger deal, of course, is they haven't even done the difficult pull yet here with the two Blood Swarmers, as we're seeing right now, and the Guardians as well, getting some CC up on those. They missed the first Sonic Screech interrupt, which is a lot of damage on the group, and interrupt spell casting, so they cannot have things like that leak through. Method EU doing an equivalently large pull. One of the Sonic Screeches goes out for them as well, but everybody is already quite healthy.
Yeah, so Method EU I want to mention again that in the time trials, they did play Underrot. They did have the fastest time out of the whole Western region, but they had a frag play a DK. So not seeing the swap out of Method EU here either means they have even a better strat to play something like that, but it's weird to think about it because they haven't shown their Underrot strategy yet with their DK, right? So it's still a secret what exactly they did in the time trial. So not bringing out the DK and just maybe changing their strat around a different comp seems interesting.
It is important to note that they're also moving a fair bit faster. I mean, they proc their 40% Reaping Wave before Method NA, and Method NA reached this room first. Granted, Method NA has done some kind of more dangerous pulls so far, so they've gotten over some kind of humps a bit faster than Method EU in that sense with some of the Blood Swarmers in the back of the room in Kragmaw's room. So Method NA now dealing with another large pull here. Method EU will still have to follow suit with some of the Blood Swarmers. Big pull here out of Method NA, and this is where we saw JB struggle a bit in the previous dungeons that they did.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of mobs that are very dangerous, especially when you do those large pulls and you pull them on top of each other. That's why we usually on live servers, when people do those dungeons on really high levels, they try to not pull too many mobs at the same time because there's just so much control needed for the lashers. You need to interrupt their cast else somebody gets stunned, and to remove the stun you either need to dispel it, which it is a disease, or you need to heal it away because it is a heal absorb. Now, if for example the Windwalker gets stunned, then they do not have a disease dispel, and then the Windwalker is not able to interrupt his assigned cast. So it can really fast go out of control if any of those casts goes through.
Good asphyxiate there by Shakib to make sure that he stuns that maggot before it does its frontal and it potentially clips somebody in the group and kills them. 60% Reaping Wave has procced as they drag it right on top of Kragmaw, the second boss of the dungeon. Now, not a mechanically complex boss, but we are in a tyrannical setting here, so there will be an indigestion frontal that for warrior tank is very simple to deal with, very well exemplified there by Method NA as Nerf just jumps, leaps out of the frontal goes off, charges back in, no problem. They will also have to deal with the charges. It snapshots it in the direction of a player, move out of the way, and then easily just stomp the maggots before they spawn afterwards. But the biggest danger Nagura, of course, is the Tantrum at 100 energy.
Yeah, so at 100 energy, the boss will run around the room, cast his Tantrum, pretty much doing a lot of AoE damage on the whole group and spawning those ticks that you need to soak on the ground, as we can see right here. If you do not soak those ticks, if you don't walk inside them, then after a couple of seconds they will actually spawn a tick out of it, and of course the tank or whoever has the most aggro will have to tank them, and they will do a stacking bleed on the tank or the healer, whoever has aggro, and it does a lot of damage.
Indeed, a lot of damage coming out for JB here, but I've seen him practice this boss a lot, so he knows exactly what he needs to handle for that Tantrum pulsing around as Kragmaw goes around the room. Now, a bit of different tanky positions for the two teams. Method EU opting to tank it on the side near the ribcage, making the charges easier to bait into the wall and not having the maggots that need to be stomped be nearly as spread out. Method NA opting to just do it right in the middle of the room, makes it easier for Tantrum as he just starts already in the middle of the room and makes the spread of maggots easier to deal with for that phase. But of course the charges do go off to the side, so pros and cons on either strategy. What is obvious though right now is that Method NA is ahead by about 15%, but keep in mind they do have that death on the board from earlier and still don't have that battle res available for another minute and a half or so.
Yeah, and we see for Method EU as they actually have two Blood Swarmers at the deceased seat on the end of the room, while Method NA only has one Blood Swarmer left to deal with. So we'll have to see if Method EU actually decides to pull a Skeleton Pack, which is already pretty difficult to deal with, on top of those double Blood Swarmers, or if they decide to pull them one by one.
Or if they just decide to shadow meld them off and just not deal with them in the first place. Wouldn't be shocked to see that. Those mobs are a huge pain in the butt. They're quite dangerous too as they fixate on different players, and you need a lot of interrupts for them. So maybe they're just planning to ignore them as they deal with Kragmaw and try to finish it off here. 13% left for Method NA on Kragmaw, as I believe they just had their last round of Tantrum. So looking to finish that up before JB kind of runs out of gas and CDs for the quite spiky damage of the Tantrums. 5% left now, and we'll see exactly what they decide to do with those Blood Swarmers. But right on their heels, Method EU 10% behind them, but do have that 5-second advantage because of the death on Method NA.
Yeah, so it's really important to have a lot of single target damage on this boss, because if you get one one less or one more tantrum actually matters quite a bit, because well, now they can finish the boss off and can ignore the maggots, but if the boss is still higher HP, the people need to run around and of course can't do any damage to the boss while they are soaking. That means if you get an extra tantrum and you have to soak, you lose just so much more time.
Decently sized pull here as we see one Bloodstorm actually get grabbed from the sky, because there are some flying around on the side of the Underrot here. The Sonic Screech unfortunately does go off, but I think that was a planned explosion there, because they do have a Defiler in their group, which has two important casts, the Shadow Bolt, AoE, Volley, and of course the Withering Curse that needs to be kicked. Otherwise, the players will do 2% less damage per stack for I think like 10 or 15 seconds, so it's a pretty long debuff. But they do well to finish off the Guardian pack along with the Defiler there, and they move over just past the third boss, likely wanting to proc their 80% reaping, which they will bring on top of the third boss and cleave it down.
Yeah, very efficient movement here by Method NA. On the other side, on Method EU, we've seen them do a pretty big pull where they pulled both of the skeleton packs on top of this worm. Once they finished off the worm, they actually kept moving onwards and just chain pulled those two defilers on top of this huge skeleton pack here.
Yeah, so they're looking to do the same thing, but they're going to proc their 80% reaping through different means. One of the volleys, I believe, goes off there, so it hits the group for about 50% of their HP, really damaging ability, making sure to move out of those Spirit Drain totems. Those essentially will one-shot a player. They do a huge amount of damage, and they proc their reaping and start on Spore Caller Xancha, the third boss of the dungeon. Method NA still working to finish off the rest of their trash, and they will backtrack and pull it on top of Xancha as well. So Method EU looking to take a little bit of a lead here. Doesn't matter that the trash ahead of this boss was already cleared by Method NA, because they have two rogues. They'll just double stealth through it.
Exactly. So Method EU, again, so we've talked about backtracking a lot. Now, Method NA walked past the boss, had to pull mobs in front of the boss to trigger the reaping and then go backwards. Now, Method EU actually procced their reaping before the boss, so they didn't have to walk back or anything. They just kept walking forward, They kept chaining mobs on top of it, and even though they were behind up until to this point, they're actually ahead now.
And Freg just gets clipped there by the upheaval as he runs over and shrooms those mushrooms down on the side, making sure that there's not too much damage from the boss. A bit of disaster here for Method NA as Shakib actually does go down. They need to use their one available battle res to get him back up. Yoda has also procced Cheat Death, so won't have that available for probably the remainder of the dungeon at this point. There's not too much left for them to go, so 2 deaths on the board for them. Method EU looking still really clean as they hit the halfway mark on Spore Caller Xancha.
Now, Method NA does have 91% trash as they kept pulling mobs on top of this, which was very efficient. Now, Method EU still needs 18%, which does mean that the mobs that Method NA actually kill later, Method EU might have to pull anyway. So this is still like a very, very close matchup. They're both on the same boss, both similar percentages, and both of them do have their Bloodlust ready. Now, unfortunately for Method NA, they did have to use 2 of their battle rests, so they have 2 deaths and they have no battle rest available to them.
Yeah, that could prove to be quite deadly later on. Team doing well here on Method EU to dodge those poisonous balls that fly across the arena every time Xancha reaches 100 energy. Every time the mushrooms on the side grow, not related to energy, of course. Xancha down to 25% HP there. Method NA down to just past 50% now. So Method EU actually kind of widening the gap just a bit. It was only about a 20% difference before. Probably another round of cooldowns came up for them. Not sure what they're going to want to be saving, though, and how big the trash pull that they're about to do is going to be, because Method NA, as you mentioned, Negro, certainly doesn't need as much trash.
Yeah, so we see on Method EU sides, of course, as well, that they don't really have to deal with a lot of those mushrooms because they just have this double cloak to go through them, get rid of them. And we just saw, so actually this is very efficient. Even though Saeli does not have an immunity or anything to get rid of this disease from the mushroom, but it obviously costs the rogues a lot of damage if they have to walk back, soak the mushrooms, and cloak them off. Now we see Saeli taking the mushrooms instead, and then getting dispelled by Maris by the Windwalker monk, because they can do disease dispel.
Yeah, so we'll see exactly what Method EU is up their sleeve here. They do deal with the Guardian pack along with that one Death Speaker in the middle, making sure to interrupt Raise Dead for the Death Speaker. Don't want that extra Guardian, and as many as they can of the Bone Shield cast, because it just adds an extra layer of damage they need to do. A bit of sketchiness here on Method NA side as we see some of the poison go off on the group. JB does manage to heal through it. It was only 1 stack if I'm not mistaken, so yeah, nothing too deadly, but close call for them. Xancha now about to fall for Method Method and A. They're going to hustle and head off as quickly as they can over to the last boss's room. Only 9% trash needed for them as Method kind of works as quickly as they can to get their trash percentage up. 95 on the board for them. They're also heading to the last mobs that they need right before the gate of the last boss.
They're just so fast right now. It's 14 minutes for them currently in the dungeon. They're ready to trigger the reaping. They're ready to get to the last boss. So insane time here. So I guess their idea was just, you know what, guys, we don't need this Unholy Decay. This Unholy Decay might look really good on the damage meters, but it's not giving us the single target damage that we need on those tyrannical dungeons. And this AoE that we need, we can have that with Rogue as well. So I feel like they just decided to take the Rogue instead, play their strategy, and say, you know what, we're going to be faster this way.
A couple of smacks of tentacle damage go out on Frag and Mears, but only chunk them to about 50% HP. After that, they avoid them quite easily. Shakib does go down again. Unfortunately, they do not have a battle res available, Nagura. So as you were alluding to, this is becoming a big problem for them. Now, the faceless corruptors that they have to deal with are about to die, but this is just seconds and seconds left. Nerf gets hit quite hard as well, manages to get healed up in a moment.
So they will also trigger the reaping if they kill off this mob. So this is a very huge problem. They cannot get out of combat here without triggering the reaping. So they will have to figure out something, because either JB needs to go off Shadow Melt, get out of combat and rest him up, and be sure that he doesn't get in combat with anything else. There we go. Okay, so JB managed to actually Shadow Melt in the corner and managed to rest him back up. But this is a disaster. Even if they manage to rest him back up, it just takes them so much time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of time lost here for Method and A as Shakib is finally rezzed and rejoins the fight, proccing their reaping. Gonna have to wait a bit as they port downstairs. They're gonna have to frantically pull this boss because Method EU has already dealt with their last reaping wave and is on the final boss here, Unbound Abomination. Titan Keeper Hezrel doing the best he can to make sure that he kills the blood spawns every time the boss reaches 100 energy. The players damage the boss, damage is translated into energy, reach 100 energy, kill 2 adds, do that 3 times over, and the boss falls over. Now, the kiting pattern for Method is a bit weird here. You usually kind of see it, you know, move in a circle around the area, but I guess they're just kind of spam AoEing as the spores get close to them, so they don't really care and only need to displace themselves should the area that they're safely under the boss gets covered. So they're really minimizing their movement, but a bit weird, that's for sure. But it's working out for them, that's what matters. 1/3 of the boss health down for the Unbound Abomination as Method and A has finally aggroed the last boss.
Yeah, one thing to note here is this circle, as we can see right now on one of the rogues, not only does it remove the magic debuffs that stack up on all the people, but it also removes the gray zones on the floor. So maybe they're using a strategy like that, just, you know what, we're going to clear these zones so we don't have to move that much. We're going to lose less damage because, of course, every time you have to dodge the frontal, which leaves those gray pools behind. If you move the boss very far, then the melees have to follow up. They might lose a melee swing or 2, and it is a damage loss, right? So anything matters here.
So we, of course, see the boss kind of being kited slowly around the room here. Getting, you know, there is some benefit to killing these mobs, especially, at least for the Prot Warrior, for instance. You're getting Victory Rush procs from them, and maybe some combo point building as well for the Rogue. So just trying to beef as much single target damage and self-sustain as they can. So Zayla can get some damage. JB is down for Method and A.
Oh, no.
Shakib is not able to res him as they used their battle reses earlier, and it is Method EU's game to take now as they deal with the last round of mobs that are spawning here in just a moment. Unbound Abomination down to 32%.
Okay, so this is Method EU's game to win. Just insanely clean run by them without even having this DK, as we've seen from all those other teams. 0 deaths, 100% trash, and it's Method EU who's gonna win.
Yeah, Method EU's gonna take this in a commanding victory. As the last blood spawn goes down, we have crowned our first cup champion in the West with an absolutely flawless victory in the tournament this weekend. Method EU.
Completely perfect run here by Method EU throughout the Western region, not dropping a single game here, fast-tracking themselves to the grand finals, going into some games we've never even seen them on, where we've seen Method NA constantly working on those reps in Underrot, but was just not enough, and Method EU with a commanding performance there, Sours.
That's right. So Method NA did a couple of adjustments from their previous dungeons. They saw that they were behind, and they pulled extra mobs that maybe they shouldn't have, and it caused deaths randomly, and then just, you know, occasional slop, random deaths. That Shakib was dying, JB was dying, they lost their tank at one point in the dungeon. So they were on the back foot the whole game, just a little bit behind their EU counterpart. And then Method EU just kind of blazed ahead, took down all the bosses before them, and then they just, boom, they got through cleanly. What was that? 0 deaths, right? So
Yeah.
That's right.
Perfect performance out of Method EU. With, you know, those little mistakes from Method NA just kept on adding on to each other, and ultimately it cost them this game in this series and first place.
And it seemed like there was just that dungeon itself. Like, Method NA couldn't quite figure out how to avoid a couple of those little deaths here and there. But getting a quick recap of this weekend, we have seen Method EU, the flawless run throughout this entire bracket here. Method NA put up an incredible fight coming out of the lower quarters here and making a very strong run, taking down those who sent them there in the first place, Abra Kedabra there. So a very impressive run without a doubt. But keep in mind, all of the players who have qualified for this cup will be receiving points that'll be helping them qualify towards the LAN Cup this summer here. So very important to know that they are not going away, that they're not taking home nothing here. Very important to know that we will be having more cups coming up as well here. The next weekend is going to be followed up by the Eastern region here. So looking at the standings right now, Method EU taking home 140 points here. Method NA following with 100. Abra Kedabra with 80. Team Pualuka with 60. Copenhagen and Learn to Fly take home 40K, and the Fallen Ones take 20. So from each region here, we're seeing the top 4 as it stands right now, having the most points to qualify for the LAN later on. We will be seeing the Eastern region, who is currently finishing up their time trials, working on their qualifications for the round of 8 for this following weekend. The Western region we will be seeing the weekend afterwards. So each weekend we will be having one cup of MDI while the other region does their time trials. From all of us here at the MDI, thank you so much for joining us this weekend. It has been an incredible series of events, watching Method EU blast their way through the bracket here on a perfect run. Method NA has had quite a redemption run coming out of the lower brackets, but was not quite able to seal it against their European counterparts here. Ending with a team kill here today, Method was the true champions here. Thank you so much for joining us for the Mythic Dungeon International. We'll see you next week.